It'll probably come as no surprise to you that the single biggest challenge that we see all the time when working with clients in Microsoft Teams is the issue of information overload. It's everywhere. Information is coming at all of us through every channel all the time. And in Microsoft Teams and every other tool out there is no exception. So it's our belief that focus changes everything. And by helping our clients focus in on the things that are critical, they're able to achieve goals much more quickly. And Microsoft Teams is just one of the tools through which they can do that. Fortunately, it's a very structured tool. So that allows us to create what we call as a little slice of information heaven. Let me give you an example of that. Imagine that you have a sales team and they're trying to get collateral to a prospect as quickly as possible. And imagine that they know exactly what channel or SharePoint folder to look in to find that critical collateral. And imagine that within that, the only thing that's there is relevant content. In other words, there's no drafts, there's no old files hanging around, no useless information. They know that anything that they see there is relevant and they can send it to the client, no questions asked. And imagine that if they did have a problem with the information in that channel or in that folder, they could go to one person, one single accountable person who would know exactly what was there and be in charge of it. And finally, imagine that file repository, wherever it might live, matched your company's structure, at least at a reasonable level. So it was pretty intuitive where to go to look for those things. That's a little slice of information heaven. Obviously, the opposite then would be information hell. And without getting into a lot of detail, this oftentimes occurs when people just deploy a tool like Microsoft Teams and without any instruction in terms of how it's going to be used, and people just start creating teams and channels all over the place. And they don't know, should I be texting somebody or emailing or chatting them in Teams or saving it in a specific channel? And simply don't know. And there's no structure around it. And so everybody does their own thing, and you end up with ad hoc implementation. So how did we get here? How did we get to a point where all of the information was accessible to everybody and everybody's kind of creating their own thing and it turns into a big, huge mess? I propose that there's really three phases we've been through. In the old days, you have kind of what you see here, the file cabinet generation, where basically everything was done on paper. And the advantage to that was if you wanted to get something in the file cabinet, you had to get past the CFO or the administrator, or whoever controlled that particular area of the office. And by nature, it had to be somewhat structured because you can't fill the file cabinet up to overflowing and still function. And so it limited the amount of information and it limited who had control and who had access. So it created natural structure. Not very good for accessibility, but really, really good for structure and accountability and simplicity. So the next phase, of course, is when you see, a few decades back when you started seeing the proliferation of file systems and network drives and things like that. There wasn't unlimited access, and they didn't have document collaboration where 15 people could be editing a document at the same time. And there was some limits to size and space. So it was much more open and much more accessible, but not as disorganized as what we see today. And fast forward to today, where obviously everybody has access to everything and can kind of create their own mess. Now, accessibility, by the way, is a great thing. It's not bad. The challenge is accessibility does not equal effective communication. And even as the leader and the CEO of the business, I don't need or want to see everything going on in every channel in Microsoft Teams throughout my company. And if I did, I would be an incredibly distracted, unfocused person. So this idea that everybody needs to see everything all the time is really a huge mistake. We need to do away with that. One of the ways we do away with it is by introducing the concept of what we call watercolor versus evergreen content. So watercolor versus evergreen content is literally, watercolor is the stuff that you used to do that, by the way, is very valuable. It's the social interaction, the natural human side of working together. It's what happens when people walk down the hallway and they have a discussion, or you're meeting about a client and you get on a little sidetrack about something. And that watercolor content is important, and sometimes it deals specifically with work elements, sometimes it doesn't. But the challenge is that when it fills up your channels and your chat sessions, you lose the evergreen stuff, which is the stuff that relates to project specs and customer needs and things that have to live on or be codified and eventually be saved somewhere. And so we help our clients differentiate those two things and make a conscious decision about when they're just talking about information that can disappear versus when things need to live on. So speaking of conscious information, this conscious structure that's created is based on, at some level, the company's org chart, like I mentioned in the second slide. And so it should match that. And it also needs to be documented very clearly so that as we create teams and channels with clients, they understand, and they're always doing it from the top down. It's never asking them the question, well, how do you want all the details to work? It's always done from the top down. And so at that stage, we start to create teams, and then we create permission levels and things like that so that clients understand where their information needs to live. That way, there's one place for each critical document. But this conscious structure takes time to create. I mean, over the course of an engagement with a client, we'll spend half a day just outlining what the structure needs to be, and then about a day or so to implement those teams and channels, and then a month or so to go through and move content and train the client, and then work from them, from quarter to quarter, which is obviously a very front-loaded investment. I have here a picture of an airplane cockpit. The one on the right is a modern touchscreen type cockpit. The one on the left is an older style Cessna. The one on the right happens to be my airplane. And the trick is this: the cockpit on the right has incredible capability, just like Microsoft Teams and many modern unified communication systems. It has incredible capability, and it's very structured, but it takes a lot of training to understand how it works. You can't, and setup. I mean, it takes hours to set up and configure this cockpit and all the software in there, and it takes hours to train to use it. On the left side, you've got something that back in the day, almost any pilot could step into that cockpit and make sense out of it. They could see it and understand the instruments that were there, but it didn't have the deep capability to see traffic and terrain and show your routes and all that sort of thing. So for clients that just want to use email and text each other, that left-hand cockpit without a whole lot of training or front-loaded investment works fine. It's not very efficient. It doesn't necessarily help them segment their information well, but it works. On the right-hand side, it's a front-loaded investment. It costs a lot of time and money up front for a lot of capability down the road. So as we're looking for clients, we're looking for people that understand that and value that. Finally, in terms of the engagement style, what we do is we provide an initial engagement, which is basically a half-day boot camp. And the client can sign up for just that, or they can sign up for more. The half-day boot camp is literally 4 hours. We spend about a week preparing for it. And when we're done with it, they have a list of teams and most of a list of channels. And those teams will then be implemented by us after the engagement wraps up. They'll also get a proposal to implement that further. In other words, to go through all the channels, all the file migrations, all that type of thing down the road. And so that all happens in that initial engagement. It's a 4-hour half-day engagement. It costs $2,750. And then the full engagement that comes later on deals with implementation, and we also do quarterly follow-up. So they can either pay for that up front, or they can pay for it as a monthly subscription over a year. In terms of the opportunities for us to work with you directly, couple things you want to know about our ideal client is they either have or want Microsoft 365. We're not going to try and convince them that they need it if they don't think they do, specifically that they want to work with Teams. They need to be frustrated with their level of disorganization. That creates the impetus for them to move forward. And generally, this isn't 100%, but we find that there's no clear owner for each team or channel in Teams. In other words, they really are just kind of ad hoc, pushing stuff out there. So what's in it for you as a partner? The first is we give 10% of the initial engagement up to 12 months. Second thing is you continue to control the client account and infrastructure, and we do not take any of the Microsoft licensing or any of that other stuff. That all resides with you, and you get to determine what type of relationship you want us to have with the client. So we like to keep that relationship with you sacred, so you're not feeling like we're taking over something that's your area. Anyways, I'd love to take any questions at this point and answer anything that I can about the program and how it works. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I appreciate your time and partnership.